Hi, my name's Amy Wheaton and I'm a clinical psychologist from over at Noohra Psychology. As another Are You OK Day is upon us, I thought it would be helpful to take a look at the types of mental health issues people are going through at the moment, how to spot the signs, and what to say to someone you think may not be okay. So firstly, what is mental health? We often hear about mental health in relation to things like depression or anxiety, but mental health is really about wellness rather than illness. It can be really helpful to think of mental health on a continuum from, say, -10 to +10, where people in the -10 to 0 category would be those of us who are really floundering in life and mentally not doing so well, while those in the 0 to 10 category would be those of us who are doing okay to even really flourishing in life. I work really strongly from a framework of what's known as positive psychology. This field focuses on the 0 to 10 of mental wellness, so to speak. It developed around a decade ago in response to psychologists' uber focus on what made people mentally ill or unwell and how we could get them back to 0, back to a baseline level of functioning. Sadly though, this is a really deficit model of human experience which failed to consider factors which lead to much more than just a baseline level of functioning, but to human flourishing. Because to be honest, who wants to be just living at baseline, just getting by? We want much more than that, don't we? Martin Seligman, one of the founders of positive psychology, has been really instrumental in researching and writing about what it is that actually contributes to this sense of wellness or well-being, and what causes human beings to flourish rather than flounder in their lives. He identified 5 factors or pillars of well-being which he believes are responsible for this. And these are an ability to experience positive emotion on a regular basis, a sense of engagement in life, work or other activities, rich and connected relationships, a sense of meaning and purpose, and a sense of accomplishment and success on whatever scale that may be for us. So it is these things working together that give us not only a sense of subjective wellness, but allow us to cope and bounce back when challenges strike. They also allow us to work productively and fruitfully, to make a contribution to our community, and realise our potential as people. So, if this is what mental health looks like, what does it look like to have poor mental health or even mental illness? What are the signs and what can we look for? People in this category commonly experience symptoms that affect their thoughts, feelings or behaviour. Usually it's all 3 at the same time. And although there are hundreds of mental health conditions, the 2 most common ones are depression and anxiety. And roughly 1 in 5 or 20% of us will experience these in any one year. Now, for the most part, all the other mental health conditions usually exhibit at least some depression and anxiety symptoms. So if you know how to look out for these, then you have a lot of your bases covered. Okay, so depression, symptoms to look for. The person might appear sad, down or tired. They might cease previously enjoyed activities. They might seem to be experiencing really low self-esteem and be quite self-critical. They might demonstrate or tell you about difficulties concentrating, paying attention or making decisions. And work may slip, you might notice that, or they might have more days off sick. You might notice a lot more social withdrawal. They might talk about changes to their appetite or to sleeping patterns as well. Now, people who are depressed often have thoughts of self-harm, and they have thoughts of death or ending their life. So I'm just going to spend a bit more time on these 2 because they're quite, I guess, the concerning symptoms of depression. Now, self-harm, what is it even? So it's actually a response to intense emotional pain with a lack of alternative coping strategies. Basically, it can numb distress or it can create an emotion when the person's feeling completely numb and void of emotion. And it actually has an addictive element for some people. So most of us have heard that there's a natural release of endorphins in response to pain, and preliminary research has actually started looking at whether self-harm operates on opioid pathways similar to heroin even. So that's going to be amazing, the result of that research. The correlation of self-harm and suicide is very weak actually. Self-harm is more often than not a coping mechanism to continue to live rather than a mechanism to end life. So it's not to say that people who do commit suicide haven't self-harmed. Most of them have, but it's more the case that self-harm doesn't correlate with suicide. So how you might notice self-harm. You might notice scratches on arms or legs. You might hear excuses like the cat or the rabbit scratched me. You might find family members or friends wearing long sleeve jumpers to cover scratches in hot weather, being uncomfortable in swimmers. So how to react. It's really important to see self-harm in the context as to its function, and don't be alarmist. If you do open up a conversation about it and the person is honest, just try to listen calmly and talk about it calmly. Now, thoughts of death or suicide, again, a common symptom of depression. What you'll find is that these are rarely disclosed and when they are, we need to take it very, very seriously. So you need to get professional help involved. I'm going to talk a little bit more about what that will look like later. More often than not though, these thoughts of death or suicide will present as in much more subtle ways. So for example, a person might start saying things like, what's the point of this all? No one would even notice if I was gone. I just don't want to be here anymore. Now, even with when these statements are expressed, more often than not, they are an expression of distress rather than an intent to end life. However, it's really up to professionals to assess this, and even professionals have such a hard time assessing suicide risk. So always hand those ones over to professionals and get them involved. So now if someone is truly suicidal and if they are making suicide plans, you'll see things, strange behaviours that are out of character. Things like getting rid of prized possessions, making a will that in a very, untimely way, getting their other affairs in order just out of the blue, a lack of care or a disregard for their future. So for example, they might run up a debt with no way to pay for it, and that might be very out of character for them. So ABS data is showing that suicide rates are at their highest level in 2 years. So yes, we do need to take these signs seriously. So moving on from depression to anxiety. With an anxious person, you're going to commonly notice a pattern of worries, fears, doubts being expressed in their words. They're going to always think the worst. They're going to catastrophize, make mountains out of molehills. They're the people who are always thinking that there's a threat behind every corner. They might appear jittery or unable to relax. They usually have a lot of trouble sleeping. They might have panic attacks. They might feel sick in their stomach, tension headaches, that's very common as well. Again, they'll have trouble concentrating and paying attention. This is usually because their head is so full of worries that they have this internal battle going on, and there's no space for other thoughts a lot of the time. They're worried about what's coming next or what they just said wrong, those types of things. And avoidance is not only a key symptom of anxiety, but it's a key reinforcer. If people don't face their fears, they never get any alternative evidence that that fear actually wasn't that scary and they can do it again next time. So what you might notice is the colleague who's constantly turning up for work late so that they don't have to do, say their part of the project. They don't like the public speaking, for example. They might be constantly turning down social invites. That type of thing can be an indicator of social anxiety. So look out for avoidance. Now, importantly, when considering these symptoms, we're looking for changes in what this person is saying, is doing, and what is going on in their life. So are they saying things that are out of character or negative? Are they behaving unlike themselves, changing their routine, not doing the things they usually love? Or do you know that they've just been through something really tough, so a divorce, lost a family member, financial struggles, or poor health? So these people are going to be really vulnerable to mental health issues as a result of these challenging times. So if we're spotting these signs and our gut is lining up and telling us that all is not well, it might be time to start a conversation and ask, are you okay? Now, before asking someone how they're doing, you need to first ask yourself, how am I doing? Am I actually okay? Am I in the right space? Am I able to take on some of this emotional junk that might come my way if I open up a conversation? Some of us aren't feeling our strongest at this point in time, so we really need to think about that. Do we have the time to listen if someone says no, they're not okay, or are we in a rush? Are we too busy at the moment? And have you picked your moment wisely? So if you're thinking of asking someone if they're okay, don't do it as you're walking into the staff meeting on a Monday morning. It might be as you're about to go out for an hour of lunch with that person and there's plenty of time to talk. So if you are prepared, then go ahead and start a conversation with the person you're worried about following 4 simple steps. Ask, listen, encourage action, and check in. So firstly, ask. In your own way, ask them how they've been going and comment on the changes in what they've been saying or doing that you've noticed or that you are worried about. So for example, they're not as chatty as usual. They've missed the usual activities like sports training, for example, or they seem really tired. So at this point, one of 2 things are going to happen. They'll tell you they're not okay, or they'll say they're totally fine, but you'll know they're really not, or you might have got it wrong as well. If they don't want to talk, try not to take it personally. Respect their decision. What you can do from then is keep an eye on them, check in at a later date, or check in with someone else who's quite close to the person. And the best thing you can do is actually keep working on developing a friendship in general. So maybe invite them to hang out, go for a walk. Remember, if the person doesn't trust or know you well, they're really unlikely to be honest if they're not doing okay. As I mentioned before, of course it's also possible that you got it wrong, you misread the signs. At the end of the day, big deal. The worst case scenario is they know what a kind and caring person even you are. Okay, number 2, listen with an open mind. So this means listen without interrupting. But what you can do is ask small questions when there are breaks in what they're saying, like, how long have you been feeling like this for? You can show empathy by reflecting back how hard it must have been for them to be feeling this way. I can't even imagine what you've been going through. That must have been terrible. Repeat back words or small statements which show you've been listening to what they're saying. And try not to tell or compare your own story unless it's extremely relevant, because we can go off topic and all of a sudden the other person thinks we're talking about ourselves. Now, if the person gets angry or upset or anxious, which is really common, try and stay calm, and again, don't take it personally. If they're very upset, just sit with them in the silence, as awkward as that might be, hand them a tissue, direct them to take a few deep breaths for a moment if they're crying. Okay, number 3 in starting a conversation, encourage action. Number 3, ask them at the end of the conversation, once you've listened to the whole story, where do you think we can go from here? What's a good first step? It's so much better for them to think this through and own this action for themselves, because it means they're probably going to take action more readily. From there, you might want to ask things like, what do you need from me? Or how can I help you right now? Of course, if you can and if you're willing and able. Or you could suggest that they do something which they find enjoyable and relaxing, or do it with them. Go for a swim, go for a walk on the beach, go get a coffee. Very importantly, encourage that person to talk to family, friends, or even a doctor or psychologist. You won't always be there for that person, so it's really important that they have a number of supports in other areas of their life and that you're not the one carrying the whole burden. Now, if the person's been feeling low for more than 2 weeks, it's super important you encourage them to see a doctor. Now, a doctor is able to write what's called a GP mental health care plan to refer them to a psychologist. This gives them 10 Medicare rebatable sessions in any calendar year, which is super helpful when it comes to finances. So, number 4, and lastly, check in with that person after you've started the Are You OK conversation. So a few days later, you might want to set a reminder in your phone to make sure that you ask that person, how are you going after we last chatted? Did the things we talked about work? If they didn't, what else can you suggest and work on with this person? If nothing has changed, keep encouraging that person to seek further help or to put further actions in place. Sometimes people take a really long time to change, and it might be very, very frustrating for you to watch this. Now, if at any stage with talking with the person you become fearful they're suicidal, or if there are any other risks that you feel are important risks to other people, for example, you can call Lifeline for advice. And of course, if there are more imminent concerns in that moment of self-harm or suicide, don't hesitate to call 000 for assistance. So, ask, listen, encourage action, and check in. And if you'd like to find out more about helping someone who's struggling, there are some excellent resources on the Are You OK website, and that's ruok.org.au. So I hope this has been helpful in knowing what kinds of signs to look for that someone might not be okay, and how to handle things going forward from there. Remember, a conversation really can change a life, so trust the signs, trust your gut, and ask, are you okay? Thank you.